So, good evening, everyone. And am I audible? Lakshmi, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible, Ramachandra.
Yeah. So, most of the participants were asking about one topic which uh, was based on spinopelvic parameters. So, I have chosen this topic and I have given to Dr. Lakshmikant Dagdia from Aurangabad. Since he has done enough and exhaustive work on his spinopelvic parameters with Dr. Manabu Itto from Japan, and I thought he'll be the right person to discuss about this spinopelvic parameters and its influence on adult spinal deformity. So basically, this topic will be based on degenerative spinal pathologies, and when it comes to degenerative pathologies, these spinopelvic parameters will be applied to a condition like adult spinal deformities. And why we want to calculate all these spinopelvic parameters, and based on which how much amount of corrections and what type of surgery and what type of fusions and what levels will be desired, mainly based on these parameters. And to talk about Dr. Lakshmikant has done his fellowship from Dr. Amul Rege. He worked with Dr. Rajshekharan in Ganga Hospital for a few months, and then he was with Dr. Manabu Itto, and as well as he was in Germany for 3 months, and now he is practicing in Aurangabad as an assistant professor. And so I request Dr. Lakshmikant to share his slide. Lakshmi, your slide has gone. Share the slides, please. Yeah.
Is it visible?
Yeah, it's visible. So basically, to go before into the topic, just an overlay I will give it so that you can understand basically why these parameters are there. And Dr. Lakshmi, I will take just 5 minutes so that the concept let the people understand so that we can go ahead easily.
Yes. Take your own time.
Yeah. Thing is, when any old age patient comes to us with a deformity, with a degeneration, with the lumbar canal stenosis, the plan of when the plan of fusion is made, then you have to know how many levels has to be fused, and if at all, if you're planning for a long level fusion, how many amount of corrections, how many levels of T-leaf, how many levels of O-leaf, and whether PSO is needed, is all based on the parameters, that is the spinopelvic parameters. This pelvic incidence is the most important thing, because pelvic incidence never ever changes in life. For a person who is born with say 45 degree of pelvic incidence, it will be the constant throughout the life. So you calculate the pelvic incidence for that particular person, and then you give lordosis to his lumbar spine based on the pelvic incidence. So how much amount of lordosis to be given from where to where? Because lordosis is not always from L2 to S1. It might vary from L3 to S1 alone. So that is defined by Ruzzoli classification. That's why the pelvic incidence has a major role in measure at the degenerative conditions. This pelvic incidence and those things will be mainly used only in deformities, especially a surgical deformity, especially in degenerative pathologies. Now, so that's how this topic was chosen. So this will help us in deciding the surgical plan. So I now request Dr. Lakshmi to share his thoughts about his adult spinal deformity and spinopelvic parameters. Over to you, Lakshmi.
Thank you, Dr. Ramachandran. Good evening, friends. We'll be discussing the adult spinal deformity, which is a complex topic these days. Increasing number of surgeries are being done in adult spinal deformity. It is a challenging condition to treat even in present era. The classification systems and treatment algorithms are still evolving in this adult spinal deformity. the main question which comes to our mind is surgery or no surgery, and if the surgical decision is taken, what targets we should be achieving during surgery while minimizing the risk in these old age patients with multiple comorbidities. So in this uh, discussion, we'll be talking about the classification of adult spinal deformity, how the clinical examination helps, radiological evaluation, which is the most important part of patients with adult spinal deformity, treatment guidelines, and complications associated with surgeries. To begin with, I'm presenting a case scenario where the patient is a 55-year-old male who has a more back pain than leg pain. And on X-ray, this is a 36-inch full cassette film right from external auditory meatus to the femoral heads. It is seen. So in AP and lateral view, we can see that in AP there is more than 30 degrees of Cobb's angle, and in lateral view the lumbar lordosis is almost maintained. And on flexion view of the X-ray, we can see the listhesis at L4, L5 level, while MRI is showing foraminal stenosis at L4, L5 level. So I would like to discuss
Hello? Hello? Am I audible? Hello? Rakesh?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes.
Am I audible? Okay. Disconnected.
Yes, I'm hearing you. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, wait for a couple of seconds. Lakshmi?
hello.
Lakshmi, you got disconnected.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, you are audible now. Lakshmi?
Yes.
Yeah. You can present the case once again because you went off suddenly.
Yes. Sorry for that. Uh, in proceeding with the treatment planning in this patient, we need to decide about the upper instrumented vertebral level, the lower instrumented vertebral level. Do we go up to the pelvis or we stop at L5? The amount of lordosis we need to achieve during surgery, the number of vertebrae we need to take into the lordosis during surgery, and the rod contouring, how we contour the rod during surgery. So the first thing we said that we'll discuss about classification. This is the simplest classification which was given by Max AB in 2005, which is basically etiologic classification. We all know this. This is a primary degenerative scoliosis, which is classified as type 1. It is also called as discogenic curve. Results from asymmetric disc degeneration and rotation of the vertebrae over facet joint as pivot. Sagittal plane deformity is usually loss of lordosis or flat back, and mostly occurs in lumbar or thoracolumbar spine, associated with symptoms of radiculopathy and canal stenosis. Type 2 is adolescent idiopathic scoliosis progressing into adulthood. The progression in adulthood might be because of degenerative changes occurring during adulthood or mechanical issues which have led to progression. The deformity also depends on the type of treatment given during adolescence. If the fusion surgery was done during adolescence, the curve is usually at the ends, either at the upper end or lower end of the primary curve, which is then classified as type 3 scoliosis, which is the curves at the end of primary idiopathic congenital or neuromuscular scoliosis. These deformities are usually severe both in frontal and sagittal plane. Other type 3 deformities are scoliosis happening because of causes outside spine, like pelvic obliquity because of limb line discrepancy or hip pathologies. Usually these types of scoliosis have deviation only in frontal plane. The rotational component is very late till the rotational component occurs late in this type of scoliosis. Type 3B is scoliosis happening because of mostly osteoporosis. Osteoporotic fractures cause asymmetric compression of vertebral body, presenting as scoliosis or kyphosis or both together. All these three types at certain stage appear as degenerative scoliosis, which then forms main bulk of adult scoliosis. One type which is increasing these days is iatrogenic loss of lumbar lordosis because of previous fusion surgeries. As more and more number of spinal fusion surgeries are done, this problem is increasing day by day. Back pain is severe in these iatrogenic loss of lumbar lordosis patients, and treatment is complicated as multiple surgeries have already been done. Another type which was not described by AB is hyperkyphosis. The frontal plane deformity is absent or minimal, but in sagittal plane, the kyphosis has increased. But criteria to differentiate this increased kyphosis from the normal are not well established till today. In clinical examination, posture and gait help us in identifying the deformity and identifying the active compensatory mechanisms in pelvis, hip, knee, and ankle.
Can you check? Sorry, Lakshmi. Can you check your? Can you keep it close to you? Some voice is low. The mic.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I will.
Yeah.
So the important observations to be made in clinical examination are horizontal gaze assessment, hyper or hypokyphosis, global truncal inclination in frontal and lateral plane, hip extension versus flexion contractures. Usually it is hip extension which compensates for the forward fall of spine, knee flexion deformities and ankle dorsiflexion. Radiographic assessment, this is the important part of our presentation today. Radiographic assessment is very important in patients with adult spinal deformity. Usually it is 36-inch full cassette views, standing anteroposterior and lateral radiographs, which should include visualization from external auditory canal to the femoral heads, because we want to see the pelvic parameters along with the frontal and sagittal alignment of the spine. So on AP radiograph, main parameters which are assessed are Cobb's angle, C7 plumb line, central sacral vertical line, and apical vertebral translation and rotation. Coronal decompensation is a component which is calculated as a distance between the C7 plumb line and central sacral vertical axis. Usually up to 5 centimeter of coronal decompensation is considered as acceptable on AP view. On lateral radiograph, we calculate the thoracic kyphosis and lumbar lordosis. Another important parameter on lateral radiograph is C7 plumb line, which is sagittal vertical axis, a vertical line drawn from the center of C7 vertebral body. Normally, it should cross the posterior superior corner of the sacrum. As the age increases, older and older age group patients have the center C7 plumb lines fall anterior to the posterior superior corner of sacrum, which is also called as horizontal offset. The distance between posterior superior corner of sacrum and this C7 plumb line is called as a horizontal offset in adult spinal deformity patients. One more angle which was described recently by Schwab and others in 2014 is a T1 pelvic angle, which is the angle between the center of T1 vertebral body to the center of both femoral heads and a line along the superior end plate of sacrum. This angle takes into consideration both sagittal vertical alignment and pelvic tilt, which are both important factors in evaluating and formulating treatment for these patients. And this measurement is unaffected by patient positioning during radiography. Even if the patient is not able to stand without support, this angle is not affected, which happens in many of these patients. And since this is an angular measurement, there is no need of calibration on X-ray. So it is easier to reproduce. Like in, so if we want to measure the horizontal offset, it has to be calibrated on the X-ray. But since this is an angular measurement, there is no need of calibration. And target value as suggested by these authors for surgical planning of this angle is less than 14 degrees. So during surgery, we should plan to achieve this angle, which is less than 14 degrees. Pelvic parameters are increasingly being described as important in patients with adult spinal deformity, even in patients with high-grade spondylolisthesis. These were first described by Legai and others during 1998. There are basically three pelvic parameters. As in the beginning of presentation, Dr. Ramachandran said that pelvic incidence is a fixed anatomic measurement with values fairly constant during lifetime. Recent papers have suggested that pelvic incidence do change over lifetime, more common in postpartum females, but uh, fairly enough, it is a constant parameter. Other two parameters are pelvic tilt and sacral slope, which change according to the compensatory mechanisms after deformity in spine. So if the C7 plumb line is falling anterior, the pelvic tilt increases and the sacral slope is decreasing, but the pelvic incidence remains same. The pelvic incidence is geometrically related to pelvic tilt and sacral slope, as pelvic tilt plus sacral slope is equal to the pelvic incidence. Sacral slope is calculated as a vertical horizontal line and a superior end plate of sacrum. Pelvic incidence is a perpendicular from the center point of sacrum to the line joining the center of both femoral heads, and pelvic tilt is a vertical line from the center of both femoral heads and the line joining the center of superior end plate of sacrum to the center of both femoral heads. So during taking lateral views, it is important that both the femoral heads are visible, and even if both the femoral heads are not superimposed on each other, we can take center of both the femoral heads, connect them with a line, and take center of that line as center of both femoral heads to calculate pelvic parameters. Supine radiograph.
Sorry to interrupt. One of your, please move this window away from the shared application. The image is coming in over the slides. Can you move it out? Is it movable or? Okay. Some default one is coming. Good. It's not moving.
There's no option for it to.
Yeah, that's okay.
Standing radiographs give us a lot of information, while supine radiographs are also suggested to be important in identifying the flexibility of an adult spinal deformity curve. Evidence suggests that greater flexible curves require less aggressive osteotomies intraoperatively, and preoperative supine Cobb's angle or alignment is one of the best predictors of 1 year post-op alignment or prognosis of a patient. Considering these parameters on AP and lateral radiographs, which have been shown to have clinical impact, like all these parameters, sagittal vertical line, pelvic incidence, and T1 pelvic angle, all these parameters have been shown to have clinical impact. Scoliosis Research Society and Schwab proposed a classification to aid decision making between operative and non-operative treatment. This classification also helps in planning the operative treatment. They suggested a classification. They have divided the curves into 4 types. One is a thoracic only curve with lumbar curve less than 30 degrees. Another is thoracolumbar or lumbar curve, which is the most common in these patients with a thoracic curve less than 30 degrees. The type D is double curve with thoracic and thoracolumbar or lumbar curves more than 30 degrees. And type N is there's no major frontal plane deformity, but the deformity is basically in the sagittal plane. And they have suggested these three sagittal modifiers which have been shown in their study to have greater clinical impact. The first one is pelvic incidence minus lumbar lordosis, which is easier to calculate preoperatively. It should be within 10 degrees to have better clinical results, or to put a patient into conservative line of treatment, the pelvic incidence minus lumbar lordosis value on X-ray should be within 10 degrees. And as the values increase of this, the symptoms are increasing and the need for surgery will increase. Similarly, the global alignment, which is suggested by sagittal vertical axis, if the distance between posterior superior corner of sacrum and this C7 plumb line, which is the sagittal vertical axis, is less than 4 centimeter, it is acceptable. We can treat the patient conservatively. As this horizontal offset is increasing, the chances of requiring surgery in a particular patient increase. Similarly, pelvic tilt less than 20 degrees is acceptable, and as it goes from +1 to +2, the need for surgery increases. But only applying this classification is not helpful because these are old age patients. They have higher ASA grade. They have clinical comorbidities like obesity and osteoporosis, larger preoperative Cobb's angle, and we need to apply these strict criteria in each and every patient will not be good enough. Like Lafayette and others have suggested that older patients require less aggressive alignment goals than younger patients. Once we have decided that this patient needs operative management, the first thing which comes in our mind is which should be the upper instrumented vertebra. Choosing the stable vertebra on AP radiograph is not enough in adult spinal deformity patients. We also need to look at on the lateral radiograph for not stopping at the apex of kyphosis in lateral plane. We also preferably should avoid the dorsolumbar junction, which is from D11 to L2. So this is the area which should be avoided as upper instrumented vertebra, D11 to L2. Evaluating disc above the level of upper instrumented vertebra for degeneration and stenosis. Evaluating vertebrae above the upper instrumented vertebral level for compression fractures, because presence of compression fractures above the chosen upper instrumented vertebral level would increase chance of post-junctional kyphosis, which can lead to post-junctional failure and revision surgery. So on AP X-ray, we look for the stable vertebra, we look for the shoulder asymmetry. On lateral, we look for the apex of kyphosis, which we should avoid. We should go above the apex of kyphosis. And in MRI, we look for the cephalad disc orientation, degeneration, and stenosis above the selected upper instrumented vertebra. So all these three things will help us in deciding the upper instrumented vertebral level. Deciding implant for upper instrumented vertebral level, pedicle screws have historically been shown to have better pull-out strength and better control to correct the curve. Few studies have advised prophylactic vertebroplasty cranial to the upper instrumented vertebral level to reduce future risk of post-junctional kyphosis or post-junctional failure. But in some contrasting studies, they have suggested a concept of soft landing and using hooks at the upper instrumented vertebral level. They found that pedicle screw constructs increase chance of proximal junctional kyphosis. Reasons were unexplained in their study. We can discuss this point at the end of our presentation. How many of us are using pedicle screws, or do some of us have experience of using hooks at the upper end of construct? Identifying patients with higher risk for post-junctional kyphosis and revision is important before we embark upon the surgery. Marked correction of sagittal balance during index surgery, old age, osteoporosis, preoperative sagittal vertical axis or horizontal abscess of more than 5 centimeter, preoperative associated comorbid conditions. All these patients are bound to have higher risk for PJK and revision. Deciding about the lower instrumented vertebral level, the discussion before some time was between L5 or S1. Do we stop at L5 or do we stop at S1? But recent studies have proven the benefit of including pelvis instead of stopping at S1 for at least fusions which are going more than 3 levels fusion. So the discussion has nowadays settled between stopping at L5 or going into the pelvis. Going to pelvis as lower instrumented vertebral level is recommended in patients with L5S1 spondylolisthesis, history of L5S1 laminectomy, central or foraminal stenosis at L5S1 level, severe degenerative changes at L5S1 level. Interbody fusion is recommended at L5S1 level for obvious reason, better biomechanical support, indirect decompression at that level, and better fusion rates with interbody fusion. So the discussion between L5 and pelvis can be settled with these points to remember. Next thing in treatment planning we discussed is we want to give the lumbar lordosis so that the pelvic incidence minus lumbar lordosis value comes below 10. But planning how for how long do we give this lumbar lordosis from L1 to S1, or measuring thoracic kyphosis from T1 to T12 and lumbar lordosis from L1 to S1 is oversimplification of the facts. So this is one of the landmark paper published in 2005 by Rozzoli and others. They have proposed a classification to include normal variations in sagittal alignment of spine, sacrum and pelvis. This classification really helps in deciding which vertebrae should be included in the lordosis part of the rod we are contouring. So what they did is Rozzoli and others have changed the concept of measuring kyphosis and lumbar lordosis. They have defined a point which is called as inflection point, which is the area from where curvature of spine transforms from kyphosis into lordosis. So that point where the kyphosis is ending and the lordosis is starting is called as an inflection point. And they have suggested that kyphosis should be measured from this inflection point to T1 and lordosis should be measured from this inflection point to S1. Other important factors which they suggested for measurement is location of this inflection point. The second is the degree of lordosis tilt angle, which is the angle between the line joining the inflection point to the anterior corner of sacrum and a vertical line from that point. Position of apex of lumbar lordosis, the degree of curvature of lower arc of lumbar lordosis. They have divided lumbar lordosis into two arcs. One is the upper arc of lumbar lordosis and another is the lower arc of lumbar lordosis, which is horizontal line is drawn from the apex and the upper half is upper arc and the lower half is lower arc. This lower arc of lumbar lordosis equals to the sacral slope in geometric evaluation. So to surprise, they have found that sacral slope ranged from 20 to 65 degrees. The global lumbar lordosis ranged from 40 degrees in one patient to 82 degrees in few others. Number of vertebral bodies in lordotic orientation, which we want to decide, like how many vertebral bodies we want to have in the lordotic contour in our rod, ranged from 1 to 8. So as many as 8 vertebral bodies into lordotic orientation in few patients. Pelvic incidence ranged from 34 degrees to 84 degrees. Inflection point, which is the point from where we are differentiating between lordosis and kyphosis, range from center of L4 to center of T10. So up to T10, sometimes they have said that there is lordotic orientation. Position of apex range from base of L5 to center of L2. This is a data which shows that normal values of pelvic parameters and sagittal spinal measurements, which we are calculating more and more in recent era, have higher range than we usually think. Based on these calculations, they have divided the normal spinal sagittal alignments into 4 types. Type 1 and type 2 have sacral slope of less than 35 degrees. But in type 1, only 3 vertebral bodies are there in lordotic orientation. While in type 2, 5 vertebral bodies are there in lordotic orientation. But if we carefully observe, the type 2, even after having 5 lordotic vertebral bodies, the lordosis is typically very less and kyphosis is also less. So this is a hypokyphotic and hypolordotic spine. Type 3, which is most commonly found in their study, has a good amount of kyphosis and lordosis, and the sacral slope is between 35 to 45 degrees. And type 4, which has maximum amount of lordosis, has sacral slope of more than 45 degrees. So according to their study, characteristics of lumbar lordosis are most dependent on sacral slope and pelvic orientation. Upper lobe of lumbar lordosis in their study was fairly constant at around 20 degrees, but lower arc is the most important determinant of lordosis tilt angle, position of apex, and global.
Lakshmikant, hello. Hello. Hello.
As a long curved lumbar lordosis. Applying these facts during surgery, like how many number of vertebrae we should include in the lordotic plane, and recreating more natural spinal alignment for a particular patient has improved clinical results of surgery recently. So basically there are two treatments in adult spinal deformity. Conservative line of treatment, which we all try as a first line of management, is basically pain management, physical therapy, alternative therapy, epidural steroid injection, nerve root block, patient injections can give temporary relief. Surgical strategy is usually between either a decompression alone or decompression with limited instrumentation and posterior spinal fusion.
Those with abnormalities.
Yeah, the discussion is between these 6 categories.
Correct.
Decompression alone, only lumbar fusion, or extending the fusion into the thoracic spine.
Correct.
Yes, but as we discussed, the apex of the kyphosis needs to be seen on lateral view. So if you are stopping in lumbar spine, you are ending at the apex of kyphotic deformity. Hello? 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 Dr. Ramachandran?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. See, the question comes from where to where we have to fuse, first of all. Actually, can you hear me?
Hello?
Can you hear me, Lakshmi?
Yes, I can hear you.
1 second, please. 1 second.
There is some background.
Yeah, 1 second. I think I'm audible right now, correct? I'm audible?
Yes.
No echoes. Okay. So where were we? So thing is, this patient is having a scoliosis, degenerative scoliosis, also called as de novo scoliosis, say around 25 degrees, and lordosis is reduced. And when you draw C7 plumb line, it's almost say 8 centimeter falling in front of sacrum. And he has a good lifestyle, no comorbidities, and his complaints are back pain. And I would preferably go towards his deformity correction. And the reasoning is because his age is still there, and he is still. Those are the things which I will think of when I consider doing a long level fusions. The same.
Okay. So what up to what level you would like to go? Like
Yeah.
you'd like to go to thoracic spine,
presume-
or you'd like to stop at lumbar
Yeah.
spine?
Yeah. Once again, presuming the patient is having the same X-ray and the patient is having only leg pain, as MRI showed only L4-5 spondylolisthesis, only leg
Yes.
L5 radiculopathy, no back pain, severe back pain, and say patient is 60 plus, not such an active guy, then I would go for a limited fusion. And the same back pain, only leg
You'll
pain.
be considering his age, bone quality, and activity level in your treatment plan.
Correct, and as well as comorbid status now. So otherwise,
Okay.
you do all surgeries for your bone, and you should not end up in a problems.
Okay. Okay.
So,
So this
because
is basically an active guy with good lifestyle and good bone quality.
correct. So in this guy, I would preferably go for a deformity correction and fusion. And typically, his MRI, which you showed, contains an listhesis L4-5, and I feel L5S1 is also degenerated. And first of all, how would I calculate and how would I choose the levels of fusion is, first I will calculate the pelvic incidence. So once I calculate the pelvic incidence, I will come to know how much amount of lordosis should be given to the lumbar spine. So
Okay. Okay.
presuming if the patient is having say 45.
I do have one more case where we can discuss here. This is the case where we can discuss about the pelvic incidence if you want to tell.
Okay, so the pelvic incidence is how much here?
It is 53.5 pelvic incidence.
Yeah, so pelvic incidence around 50, then the lordosis should be falling within the 10-degree range of this pelvic incidence. So
Yeah.
have to give a lordosis in such a way, pelvic incidence minus lumbar lordosis should be within 10 degree. So that's our
Exactly.
ultimatum. And
Yes.
how do you achieve is based on whether you are going to do a T-lift or whether you are going to do a O-lift or whether you are going to do an osteotomy, pedicle subluxation osteotomy. To regain the lordosis. To regain the lordosis is based on the amount of lordosis that is there. Presuming this patient looks like a lumbar lordosis is flattened, and we need a good lordosis to be restored, something around 30 to 40. Then based on that,
We want around 40. Yes.
yeah, 30 to 40. So we have to calculate how many. If I do multiple level T-lifts, so each level T-lifts will give something around 10 degree to 15 degrees. And if you do an O-lift, it might give 15 to 20 degrees. And if you do a PSO, it gives one level 30-degree correction itself. So based on the amount of lordosis, I will choose the procedure, the reconstruction procedure, anterior, whether it is T-lift or O-lift, or it is a large osteotomy. Give the lordosis.
Okay.
So the next question which comes is, okay, I have to achieve a lordosis of say 50 degree in this case, presume, from where to where? The question comes is from where to where? Whether, because all time it may not be from L2 to S1. In fact, it is always from L1 to S1. For some people it might be S1. So now I will find out what type of Ruzzoli he was in. Because
Yes.
he's a degenerated guy, you will not know from where to where the lordosis was. So you have to presume and think, this guy had a lordosis from L1 to S1 based on the Ruzzoli types. The Ruzzoli types is classified as type 1, 2, 3, and 4. In type 1 and 2 is low sacral slope. And type
Yes.
first high sacral slope. So based on that, you find out which category of Rosoli he falls in, and based on that, I will give a contouring of rod and I will do the correction maneuver. That's all is the principle which I follow in doing.
This falls in type 1 or type 2 because the sacral slope is 31.3, so which is less than 35.
Yeah,
so this falls in type 1 or type 2.
So based on that, you have to do a correction. So that principle of an adult spinal deformity, first thing is calculating the pelvic incidence. And based on the pelvic incidence, you have to calculate the lumbar lordosis. And based on the lumbar lordosis, based on the pelvic incidence, you have to find out what category of Rosoli he fits in, and then you have to do a correction. And usually, trust me, most of the times it falls from D10 to S1 because the upper instrumental vertebra you cannot stop at thoracolumbar junction, and you cannot because most of the times degeneration happens in the lumbar level. The scoliosis, deformities, everything happens with the lumbar level. And you cannot stop at D8. If you are going to T8, then you have to climb up more into T4 actually.
Okay.
Right? The UAV has to be, the next disc above should not have any degeneration. The next level should not have any stenosis. And those points, and that UAV should not be in the kyphosis level, and UAV should not be at the thoracolumbar junction. So those points I will look into, and I will proceed ahead in the surgery. And I think for this case, it will be E10 to S1.
Any other view about only limited lumbar fusion, like from L3 to S1? Anyone in the participants would like to defend thought about L3 to S1 fusion?
Yeah. Any participants, any questions? Any?
Hello. Sir, this is Sudhir. Yeah,
Sudhir,
Dr. Sudhir. Yeah, Sudhir from Chennai, sir. Yeah, I just wanted to discuss few things. Yeah, regarding this treatment option, always, as you said, the confusion is between limited decompression or fusion or so. So actually, there's a paper I came across, a paper by Lamartina in European Spine Journal in 2014. So that's a good paper, which again gives us an idea about whether you have to do a limited decompression fixation or whether you have to extend your fixation. So again, the same things. They actually see the they see the degeneration based on something called as apical segment disease based on the MRI. So if the apex and if the apex is a disc, they usually define the apical segment as one disc above and one disc below. So totally there will be 3 discs which is included in an apical segment. So if the degeneration is severe and if the symptoms are because of those of this apical segment, they say that you have to address the apex. Suppose if it is not in the apical segment and if it is either above or below, totally away from the apical segment, they say that you can go ahead with decompression. Actually, that's a good paper which has divided into 4 categories: type 1, 2, 3 and 4. So type 1 they do limited decompression fixation. Type 2 again from L1 to S1 after taking these sacropelvic parameters into account. And type 4 is basically where you require good osteotomies and others because it is coronally and sagittally imbalanced. So that actually will give an idea. And apart from that, as Dr. Ram said, calculating the pre-op angles is very important. But the problem is in our setup, if it is UK or US, they are doing from T4 or T6 to S1 or pelvis. They do it in a routine way. Wherever I've been, they are doing it routinely, and the patients are accepting it. And even if it fails, they do it for the second time or third time. But in our setup, we have so many other factors which we have to take into account in Degen Scoli.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Demands globally are totally different.
Yeah, so totally different. So as you and Dr. Ram said, if the disease is limited to a particular segment, and if the complaint is predominantly leg pain and it is because of neurological compression, then I think we can just go ahead with decompression plus or minus fixation, depending upon your decompression limits.
Yeah.
Uh,
Does any of the participants use root block, like you said a case scenario that there is only one limb single radicular pain? Do you sometimes use a nerve root block
Definitely.
preoperatively to confirm your findings?
Definitely, sir. That plays significant role in these kind of Degens coli patients where they come with radiculopathy. Suppose if we find a particular like L45, they respond to the block, and if there is compression or stenosis at that region, then definitely you can just do limited decompression. Again, as like we were discussing based on the age and comorbids. Suppose
Yes.
60 years and above with significant osteoporosis and multiple comorbids, I don't think there is much use in doing an extensive surgery,
Yeah, yeah,
which
exactly.
may where the chances of failure is high. So in our setup, I think it is better to limit ourselves based on the patient's demands and symptoms.
Exactly. That is the first and foremost thing. Like to resolve what patient has came to us and to give a long-lasting treatment is important in our scenario.
Yeah. Yes.
Sudhir has
Dr.
rightly
Sudhir, for
told about the world trends actually. In India, most of the times people will be happy when the neurological symptoms are taken off. And the patient who comes with back pain as a predominant symptom, and whatever you do, I feel most of the times the patient may not be having a happy ending only. And
Okay.
European countries, you do a lot of deformities for adult region, and the patients are much more healthy. The patients are much more active. The patients have much more lifespan, and the patient's bone stock is good. And you can do such surgeries, but in our population where these things are lacking, dealing the neurological complaints is far sufficient. And most of the times, when these deformity corrections for adult region things are considered as a part of treatment, then yeah, you should not miss in measuring these angles.
So this is what was done for this particular patient. We went from T10 to, this is Dr. Ramachandran's case. They did it from T10 to S1. Usually pelvis is included in these long fusions these days, but for reasons maybe we don't know, they have not included the pelvis.
So, Dr. Sudhir,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
so when do you see, most of the times, yeah, I agree with this because I have not included the pelvis, and this is a lady patient, T10 to S1. It's like a base of the concept, right? So you have to give a solid
Yes.
base.
Yes,
So
sir.
either you have to do an L5S1 interbody fusion, or
Yes, sir.
in addition to that, or as an alternative to L5S1 interbody fusion, you have to do an iliac screws.
Definitely, yes, sir. Yeah, most of the times I prefer L5S1 T-leaf, sir. Good L5S1 T-leaf. And when there is a severe degeneration of L4-5 as well as L5S1 with L4 falling into the base of the apex or so, I do asymmetrical T-leaf at L4-5, and L5S1 I do a T-leaf. And I usually, if it is from D10, I stop with that. I don't put the iliac screws at all. Suppose very rarely for Degens coli, hardly I have put I have done only 2 or 3 cases of S2LR iliac screws for Degens scoliosis. I think again the question is whether do we have to be over aggressive in these patients. It's a very big question mark.
Exactly. It takes
As
time
you
to
rightly
insert those
said,
pelvic screws.
yeah, as you rightly said, 70-year-old male or female in UK or Europe and US is almost equal to 45 years old or 50 years old individual in India. So we can't compare that population with our population. And again, considering the socioeconomic status, comorbids and other things, I think it's better to decide the treatment of these patients according to our setup. So, especially Degen Scoli, it is always better not to, I mean, to follow the treatment modalities according to our setup rather than just following the Western literature. I think if we are going from D10, then L5S1 TLF is sufficient, and going to iliac screws or S2 LR iliac screw is not mandatory, provided if you are able to get a good S1 screw purchase directed to the sacral promontory with a good interbody fusion.
So the basic message is not try to be too fancy and try to achieve maximum with doing minimum in these old age and frail patients.
Correct.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
When you are considering it, please don't forget about these pelvic incidence parameters. Otherwise, you will end up with your PJKs, screw pullouts, rod fractures.
That is again a very big problem.
Yeah.
This PJK, that itself is a totally different and vast topic to discuss about. But as you rightly said, nowadays again there are many other papers which say that you have to do prophylactic vertebroplasty at the level above to prevent osteoporotic fractures. So
PJK and
it is always better to limit and to be safe as much as possible in these patients. So that's what I feel basically.
Yeah. So,
thank you.
I've seen some surgeons doing the last screw, presumed D10. They used to do an MIS screw. They used to do an, without ripping of the muscles at the top level, they used to do an augmented cemented screws. So,
Fenestrated.
yeah. So, it doesn't pulls out. Dr. Prince, any points to be added? Prince, you are there?
Hello.
Yeah.
Prince.
Hi, Ram.
Yeah, hi. Any take messages for Degens? Because you might have been in Australia doing in and out of all these things there.
Yeah. Every week they have been doing T10 to pelvis, but the scenario is entirely different in India. What I have learned is like once there's a Degens scoli and then if a patient presents with radiculopathy, the thing is you have to know where from. Like if it is a L45 and if you give a block and then that settles down, then you know that you need to only decompress that. But suppose in case if you have to decompress and then there's a lateral listhesis because of this Degens scoli, then we may have to instrument that level. But routinely they don't do a limited decompression or a fusion. They do entire thing from T10 to pelvis. Even if there is 2 levels of lateral listhesis, the standard treatment is T10 to pelvis. But I think as Sudhir pointed out, in India it's a different scenario, and then we need to tailor make some things for our patients, because I think mostly if it is a radiculopathy, I think we have to do a block and then try to do a limited decompression. By meaning that I would see if there is a lateral listhesis, then you have to decompress the lateral recess. You may have to take more of pars and undercut the facet. By the time you might cause instability, more instability. So I think we may have to do a fusion. So in case of doing that, we may have to do you have to judicially choose the level and do a limited fusion. Of course, if a patient's demands are more, and then if the patient is young, as you pointed out, then if you're thinking of doing a full deformity correction, then I think you have to do T10 to pelvis if you're doing. I would rather do 2 or 3 levels of interbody, especially at L5S1, because the stresses at L5S1 are high, and then there is a lot of sacral insufficiency fractures if you stop at S1. So I would rather go to iliac screws with iliac screws if I'm going to T10 to pelvis. And by doing an interbody at 2 or 3 levels, you get more of lordosis. If you get about say 15 to 20 degrees of lordosis, that itself makes your construct more anatomical, getting the sagittal plane. I'm more of sagittal plane, giving more importance for sagittal plane than the coronal plane in this correction, because whenever you stop at T10, you are expecting, because when you do a correction from T10 to pelvis, you don't want to use the rod and do a cantilevering and then fix the rod, because you want as much less stress in the top construct, and you need a more of a soft landing. The curve, the rod should be contoured in such a way that you should not create more stress there. But even doing so, the general tendency for the patient is to stoop forward, and then they come with the PJK. And the lesson to be learned here is you should not stop at the apex of the kyphosis. Suppose you are extending a curve like PJK, you cannot stop at T5 or T6, because that's where your kyphosis is, apex of your kyphosis in sagittal plane. So you may have to go up. So these are the things I learned. And I think here in our setup, I have hardly done, I think in the past 4 years, I would have done some 2 cases of T10 to pelvis. So the experience of doing adult degen is much less. But I've done most of limited decompression and limited fusions, even in a degen scoli.
Yeah.
Over to you, Ram.
Yeah. Thanks for the comments.
Yeah.
View of a surgeon who has worked in Australia for 2 years, and he says for an Indian population, taking implants should be kept as a least option. And any things which you want to show further, Lakshmi, and any questions? Any questions?
Supposing, yeah. If there are any questions.
Yeah, conclude, Lakshmi.
As discussed, like adult spinal deformity is a complex problem. We need to understand patient expectations before planning a particular treatment for that patient, because patient expectations are variable right from patient to patient and right from India to UK. If we are planning for a long fusion, meticulous planning of that fusion, and the minimizing risks with newer protocols will be important. And beware of complications. Most important is post-junctional kyphosis and post-junctional failure. And to diagnose them early and treat them at a nascent stage helps in a good way. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Ramachandran, and thank you all the listeners.
Thanks, Lakshmi. Any questions, if at all any, or otherwise we will end up this meeting. Thanks for joining, Lakshmi.
Thank you.
Thanks.